Mouin Rabbani is non-resident fellow at the Centre for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies, and he's also co-editor of Gedalia. It's an online publication covering the Middle East. He's joining us live now from Montreal. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu describing this as a tragic accident, saying a grave mistake took place. Is this an appropriate response, do you think?
No, of course not. And I would point out that in contrast to previous such attacks where Israel either celebrates them or doesn't even bother giving an excuse for its actions, now it has also claimed that it is launching an independent investigation. So quite clearly, what's called the diplomatic tsunami, the recent ruling by the International Court of Justice, the ICC applications for arrest warrants and so on, are gradually beginning to have an effect. At the same time, when we look at the broader international situation, what we've learned is that US President Joe Biden's red line is actually a river of Palestinian blood, and that senior US officials are quite happy to swim in it. As far as the Europeans are concerned, we've seen quite extensive condemnation of this attack and denunciation of this attack. But 8 months into this brutal genocidal campaign, I think simply making statements becomes entirely meaningless when this is not paired with concrete actions to bring such acts, which are taking place on an almost daily basis, to a definitive end.
With the increase in diplomatic pressure, with the pressure coming from the recent rulings from the International Court of Justice, plus, of course, from the domestic pressure that the Prime Minister is facing as well, do you think that all we're going to see is just a change in his language? Is it going to have any impact at all on the way that Israel is carrying out its military operation in Gaza?
At this rate, absolutely not. And I think one objective of this attack was to demonstrate that the U.S. actually does not have a red line. And bear in mind, according to the available reports, Israel used exactly those bombs, the 2,000-pound bombs, in its attack on Tel Sultan yesterday. These are the same bombs that Biden had claimed he was suspending the delivery of to Israel. So this is basically a message, essentially raising a middle finger to the ICC, to the ICJ, to the international community, and making the claim, Washington has our back. We really don't care about anything else.
In terms of the linguistic gymnastics that we've seen over the last several months with regard, but particularly in the last couple of months with regard to the operations that are going on in Rafah, do you think that we are going to see a continuation of the avoidance of words like a major operation, a large-scale operation, that may well be what we're seeing on the ground, but the frames of reference, if you like, are going to be much milder?
I think so. We've seen the constant shifting of the goalposts. I would also make another point. At various stages, we have seen senior U.S. officials, President Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and others make statements that appear to be critical of Israel or laying down boundaries regarding what Israel can and cannot do. I don't think we should look at those in terms of reflecting any change in U.S. policy. What they actually are attempts to respond to growing domestic public opposition, to growing global criticism of the U.S.'s unconditional support of Israel, and in a sense to divert, to change the subject, to give the appearance that something is changing in Washington. But in effect, nothing happens, and these statements are intended purely for public consumption to mask the continuation of the precisely same policies with respect to Israel's genocidal onslaught in the Gaza Strip.
There are cautious talks going on with regard to the possibility of moving towards another set of potential ceasefire negotiations. Do you think, given the pressures that you've been discussing, there might be some pressure on Israel to move forward, to try to find some sort of way of finding some sort of common ground with Hamas, with the negotiators, albeit that they might not want to make that public?
Well, I would first look at what happens in the United Nations Security Council this week. The Algerians are apparently preparing to submit another draft resolution calling for a ceasefire. If, as widely expected, the US either manages to water it down to the point of making it meaningless, or if it fails to do that and once again casts its veto, that would be a very clear message to Israel, to Netanyahu, that they can continue and that these ceasefire discussions are really no more than a fig leaf for Israel's ability to continue with its campaign in the Gaza Strip. So we have to look, I think, not only at the negotiations themselves, but at the broader context in which they're being conducted.
Mouin Rabbani, we appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera, so thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.